In the shadow of the great baobab trees, where the whispers of ancestors ride the wind, there is a story they tell in hushed tones. It is a story of a love that shattered a kingdom. A king whose wealth was as vast as the savannah itself, who lived in a palace of sun-baked clay and gold, surrounded by every luxury. But he was a man with a hollow heart, and for that emptiness, he thought he found a cure in the most forbidden of places. He cast aside his queen, a woman of noble blood and fierce pride, for the quiet, gentle girl who swept his floors. He thought he was choosing love. He thought he was choosing happiness. But he was blind to the ancient forces he had offended, for in his arrogance, the king did not see the subtle power the maid carried. He did not notice how the flames in the oil lamps would bow when she passed, or how the village dogs would fall silent at her approach. On the night he sent his queen away, a terrible silence fell over the land. The drums stopped their beating, the wind itself seemed to hold its breath, and from the depths of the forest, a single mournful cry echoed, a sound that was neither human nor beast but something far older. The king awoke the next morning, a smile on his lips, ready to claim his new happiness. But the smile died when he looked into the maid's eyes. They were no longer the soft brown pools he remembered. They were dark, bottomless, and held a secret as old as time. He reached for her hand, but his fingers passed through her form like mist. The humble girl he thought he loved was gone, replaced by something he could not comprehend. His great wealth, his powerful armies, his towering palace, they were all useless. He had traded his entire world for a phantom. What terrible truth lay behind the maid's gentle smile? And what price must a king pay for a love that was never meant to be? There is a curse that lives in the heart of our village. It does not hide in the dark forest or the deep river. It lives in the most beautiful of things. It lives in the drum. This was no ordinary drum. Its skin was stretched from the hide of a sacred bull, and its body was carved from a single piece of mahogany inlaid with cowrie shells that whispered of the ocean. They called it Ojuba, the heart drum. Its voice could make the old dance with the vigor of youth and call the rains from a cloudless sky. But it came with one single unbreakable rule. It must never, ever be played for a selfish heart. Young Adewale knew the stories, but he was arrogant. He desired the chief's daughter, and she was promised to another. So on the night of the great festival, driven by a jealous fire in his blood, he did the unthinkable. While the village feasted, he stole into the sacred hut, took the drum, and played not for the joy of the people, but for his own desperate want. The beat was not a rhythm of celebration, it was a hungry, pounding pulse that echoed his own desire. The moment he struck the final beat, a silence heavier than any sound fell upon the land. The air grew cold. The drum, now silent, felt different. It felt watchful, and from that day forward, the drum would not leave him. If he tried to give it back, it would appear again at his doorstep by morning. If he tried to burn it, the flames would die. It was bound to him. Now, it sits in the corner of his hut. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when Adewale is gripped by a fear he cannot name, he hears it, a single soft tap. Then another, a slow, mocking rhythm that matches the frantic beating of his own terrified heart. He played a rhythm of selfish desire, and now the drum plays back the rhythm of his soul. What terrible price must a man pay when he awakens an ancient magic for his own gain? And what happens when the drum decides to play its final devastating song? In a village cradled by emerald hills and nourished by the generous river Olua, life flowed with the steady, predictable rhythm of the seasons. This was the home of the Iron Tribe, people known across the land for their deep connection to music, to story, and to the ancient covenants they held with the world of the spirits. Their community was a tapestry of shared labor and shared joy, where the success of one was a celebration for all, and the failure of one was a burden on every heart. At the center of this world was the heart drum, Ojuba. It was not an instrument for mere entertainment. It was the spiritual heartbeat of the Iron people, carved by the first chief and consecrated with prayers that lasted 7 days and 7 nights. Its power was a sacred trust. It was played only during the highest festivals and most solemn ceremonies, to bless the harvest, to honor the ancestors, to heal a sickness that plagued the tribe. Its sound was a direct conduit to the realm of the divine, a collective prayer given rhythm and form. The one rule was absolute, passed down through generations. The heart that plays the drum must beat for the people, not for the self. To play for personal gain is to poison the well from which all drink. Our story truly begins with a young man named Adewale. He was not a villain. He was a creature of burning passions and immense, unchecked pride. The son of a skilled woodcarver, Adewale was blessed with strong hands and a captivating smile, but his spirit was restless. He watched the elders with a simmering impatience, believing the old ways moved too slowly for a man of his talents and desires. His heart was a field of untamed wants, and the greatest of these wants was for Adesua, the daughter of Chief Olumide. Adesua was everything the tribe valued, graceful, wise, with a laugh that sounded like the gentle chime of rain on broad leaves. She was promised to Dapo, the village's finest hunter, a man of quiet strength, deep humility, and a heart that was steadfast and true. He represented the very essence of the community spirit that Adewale so carelessly disregarded. Adewo saw not a union that strengthened the tribe, but a prize he had been denied. His love, though he called it by that name, wasn't selfless admiration. It was a fierce, possessive hunger. He believed that with Adesua by his side, he would finally be seen as more than just a woodcarver's son. He would be complete. The stage was set on the night of the festival of the new moon. The air was thick with the scent of roasting yams and spiced palm wine. A great fire leapt toward the star-strewn sky, and the entire village gathered, their faces glowing in the warm light. The elders began to play, their music a complex, joyful conversation with the heavens. But Adewale heard none of it. His eyes were locked on Adesua, who sat beside Dapo, her head resting gently on his shoulder in a gesture of simple, contented love. A dark, desperate resolve crystallized within Adewale. The stories of the drum's power, once just childhood tales, now seemed like the only solution to his torment. He remembered the whispers. The drum can make the impossible possible. It can bend fate to its rhythm. As the village danced, lost in collective ecstasy, Adewale slipped away from the circle of light. The path to the sacred hut, usually guarded by a deep, respectful fear, felt magnetically drawn beneath his feet. His heart hammered a selfish, frantic beat against his ribs, a rhythm of pure want that drowned out the communal music behind him. He pushed aside the beaded curtain, and there it was, Ohuba. It seemed to almost pulse in the dim light, the cowrie shells gleaming like 100 watching eyes. The air in the hut was still and heavy, charged with the weight of centuries. A sane mind would have felt the warning, the palpable presence that demanded reverence. But Adewale's mind was clouded by a fever dream of possession. He reached out, his fingers trembling not with fear but with anticipation. He lifted the sacred drum. He stole the heartbeat of his people for himself. And outside, for the briefest of moments, the collective music of the village faltered. A single dissonant note hung in the air, as if the universe itself had gasped. But the celebration continued, oblivious to the fracture that had just been born in their midst. The peace of the Iron tribe was shattered, and a slow ancient poison had just been released into the world, beginning its work with the very first selfish beat. The morning after the festival, a wrongness had seeped into the soil of the village. It was a subtle thing at first. The sun rose, but its light seemed pale and weary, the air usually alive with the chatter of birds and the distant rhythm of mortar and pestle was preternaturally still. Adewale awoke in his hut, the memory of the previous night a feverish blur. For a moment he dared to hope it had all been a dream, but then his eyes fell upon it. Ojuba! The drum sat squarely in the center of his floor, as if it had always belonged there. A cold dread, sharp and clear, finally pierced the haze of his desire. His first thought was to return it, to confess. He wrapped the drum in an antelope hide, and with a heart pounding a rhythm of pure fear, carried it back to the sacred hut. He placed it on the exact spot from which he had taken it. He whispered apologies to the air, to the ancestors, his words sounding hollow and small in the silent space. He fled, believing the nightmare was over. But the next morning, he awoke to find the drum once more in the center of his hut. The antelope hide was neatly folded beside it. It was as if he had never moved it at all. A cold sweat broke out on his brow. He tried again. This time, he took it deep into the forest, to a place where a great waterfall crashed into a misty pool, a place of powerful, cleansing energy. He pushed the drum into the churning waters, watching as it was swallowed by the foam. He stayed until the sun began to set, ensuring it did not resurface, then returned home, exhausted but hopeful. His hope was a fragile thing shattered at dawn. There it was, Ojuba. Not only was it back, but its surface was perfectly dry, the cowrie shells gleaming as if freshly polished. A single dead leaf was stuck to the hide, a leaf from a tree that only grew near the waterfall. The drum was not just returning, it was mocking him. The strangeness was not confined to his hut. The village itself was beginning to sicken. The first and most terrible sign was the silence. The birds had stopped singing. Not a single chirp, not one flutter of wings could be heard in the trees. It was an eerie, suffocating quiet that made every footstep sound like a thunderclap. Then the river Olua, their lifeblood, began to change. Its clear, rushing waters slowed to a thick, muddy trickle. The fish that had sustained them for generations floated to the surface, belly up, their eyes milky white. Whispers began to circulate, first as nervous gossip, then as terrified accusations. The elders, their faces etched with a deep concern none of the younger generations had ever seen, gathered in a solemn circle. Babalawo Ifa, the oldest and most revered seer, his skin like ancient leather, and his eyes clouded with cataracts that saw more than any clear sight could, spoke after a long silence. "A covenant has been broken," he rasped, his voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "The heart of our community has been poisoned by a single selfish act. The spirits are offended. The land itself is grieving." Adewale listened from the outskirts of the crowd, his blood running cold. He wanted to scream his confession, to beg for forgiveness. But the weight of his shame and the terrifying supernatural nature of the drum's return glued his tongue to the roof of his mouth. To confess now was not just to admit theft. It was to admit he had brought this curse upon everyone he knew. He was trapped in a prison of his own making. The community decided on a cleansing ritual. Led by Babalawo Ifa, the entire village gathered at the shrunken banks of the river. They brought offerings of kola nuts and palm oil. They chanted ancient prayers, their voices a desperate, unified plea against the oppressive silence. Adewale was forced to participate, his own chants feeling like lies on his lips. As the Babalawo sprinkled the sacred water, a sudden wind whipped through the gathering, snuffing out the ritual torches despite the lack of any clouds in the sky. The water in the ceremonial bowl turned a murky, sickly brown. The ritual had failed. Worse, it had been rejected. That night, the true psychological torment began for Adewale. He started to hear it, a faint, almost imperceptible thump in the dead of night. It was the sound of a heart beating. His own heart would race, and the external thump would quicken to match his pace. Then it would morph. It would become the soft, steady beat of a drum. Not a celebratory rhythm, but a slow, deliberate, and menacing pulse that seemed to come from the walls, from the ground, from inside his own skull. He would press his hands over his ears, but it changed nothing. The sound was not in the air, it was in his soul. His health began to fail, not from any visible illness, but from a deep, consuming exhaustion. Sleep became impossible. Shadows in the corner of his hut would twist and writhe when the drumming was at its loudest, taking on shapes of dancing figures with judging eyes. He was starving, but the sight of food, the yams that were now shriveled and blackened in the fields, the spoiled fish, made him retch. The final blow to his crumbling sanity came when he looked into a calabash of water to drink. For a fleeting second, he did not see his own reflection. He saw the face of Babalawo Ifa, his blind eyes staring directly into Adewale's soul. And then the reflection spoke a single silent word that echoed in the depths of Adewale's mind. Return. It was not a command to return the drum. He had tried that. It was a command to return to the source, to undo what had been done. But how? The drum was a part of him now, a parasitic twin feeding on his guilt. His love for Adesua had curdled into a bitter ash in his mouth. He could no longer even remember the sound of her laugh, only the relentless, accusing beat of the heart drum. Driven by a madness born of utter despair, Adewale made a decision. He could not live like this. And if the village was to be saved, he had to confront the force he had awakened. One night, as the phantom drumming reached a fever pitch, he grabbed Ojuba and ran from his hut. He did not know where he was going, only that he had to flee the village to take the curse with him into the wilderness. He stumbled through the silent, dying forest, branches clawing at his skin like bony fingers. The drumming in his head was his only guide, growing louder and more intense with every step. He was weak, delirious, and on the verge of collapse when he found himself in a small circular clearing he had never seen before. The moon, blood red due to the lingering haze, shone directly down onto a single flat stone at the clearing's center. The drumming stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. A voice, ancient and layered like the rings of a 1,000-year-old tree, spoke from the shadows. It did not speak in words, but in feelings that blossomed directly in Adewale's mind. You called with a selfish heart. Now you must answer with a selfless one. From the darkness between the trees, a figure emerged. It was not a man nor an animal. It was a spirit, a wisp of smoke and shadow, with eyes that held the light of dead stars. It was the guardian of the covenant, the true owner of the drum. The poison is in the blood, the spirit voice intoned. To remove it, you must purify it. You have brought the curse, only you can lift it. But the path to redemption is paved with 3 tests. Fail anyone, when the drum will forever be your heart, and your heart alone will beat for a village of graves. The spirit extended a hand of shimmering air toward the flat stone. The first test begins now. The spirit's words hung in the air, not as sound, but as a cold weight in Adewale's soul. 3 tests. Before he could even form a thought, the world around him dissolved. The silent forest, the blood-red moon, the flat stone, all of it melted away into a swirling, blinding whiteness. He was no longer in the clearing. He was standing at the edge of his own village, but it was a vision from a nightmare. The huts were smoldering ruins. The fields were vast graves of ash. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and a silence so absolute it felt like a physical pressure on his eardrums. And there, sitting on the sacred stool in the center of the devastation, was a figure. It was himself. His doppelganger's eyes were hollow, black pits, and in his hands he held Ojuba, which he beat with a slow funereal rhythm. With every beat, a fresh wave of darkness pulsed out from the drum, leeching the last remnants of Kara and life from the world. This is the future your heart has composed. The spirit's voice echoed in the void. This is the first test. Witness the symphony of your selfishness. Adewale fell to his knees, a scream trapped in his throat. He saw the ghostly, translucent forms of his people, his mother, his friends, Adesua, wandering the ashen streets, their faces masks of silent accusation. This was the world he had made. The horror of it was so complete, so utterly devastating, that it shattered the last remnants of his pride. A raw, broken sob finally tore itself from his chest, not for himself, but for them, for the life he had destroyed. The moment his tears hit the barren earth, the vision vanished. He was back in the clearing, gasping, the taste of ash still on his tongue. The spirit stood unwavering, its starlight eyes fixed on him. Without a word, it gestured to the flat stone. Ojuba now sat upon it, but it was changing. The beautiful mahogany was splintering, the sacred hide cracking like parched earth. It was dying, and as it died, so would the last hope of his people. The second test, the voice resonated. You stole its song. Now, you must give it a new one, not with your hands, with your truth. Adewale understood. He crawled toward the stone on his hands and knees, his body weak, his spirit raw. He looked at the dying drum, the instrument of his damnation, and he did not see a cursed object. He saw the heart of his tribe, and he had been the disease that infected it. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. How could mere language convey the depth of his regret? Instead, a sound emerged, a low, guttural, wrenching moan of pure remorse. It was the sound of a soul turning itself inside out. He poured everything into that sound. The image of the barren future, the sight of the dying river, the sound of his mother's voice, which he feared he would never hear again. It was not a song. It was an autopsy of his own heart, conducted aloud for the spirits to witness. As he poured his grief into the air, a miraculous thing happened. The cracks in the drum began to glow with a soft golden light. The splinters knit themselves back together. The parched hide softened, stretching taut once more. His confession, his true and selfless sorrow, was the medicine it needed. The drum was healing. A wave of exhaustion so profound it felt like death washed over him. He had given everything he had. He collapsed before the stone, utterly spent. He had passed the second test. He waited for relief, for absolution. It did not come. The spirit floated closer, its form now shimmering with an intense, blinding light. It pointed not at the drum, but at Adewale's chest. "The poison is in the blood," it repeated, its voice now thunderous and final. The third test, the heart that played the selfish rhythm, must be stilled. The blood that carried the curse must be spilled. To save the many, the one must fall. You must pour your life into the drum, not with a song, but with your essence. Only then will the waters flow. Only then will the silence break. Adewale's breath hitched. This was not redemption. This was a death sentence. He looked from the spirit to the beautifully restored drum, then down at his own hands. He finally understood the true cost of his arrogance. It was not a punishment. It was a balance. He had taken life from the community. He must now give his own to restore it. There was no hesitation left in him, only a profound, aching peace. He had seen the world without his people in it, and that was a world he refused to inhabit. With a strength that came from somewhere beyond his broken body, he stood. He reached for the drum, not with the trembling hands of a thief, but with the steady reverence of a priest. He cradled it. He then reached down and picked up a sharp flint-like stone from the base of the altar. He looked once more toward his village, imagined the river flowing, the birds singing, Adeshwa laughing, free from the shadow he had cast. A faint smile touched his lips. He drew the sharp stone across his palm. A line of crimson welled up, not pouring forth in a rush, but flowing in a steady, deliberate stream. He held his bleeding hand over the center of the drum. As the first drop of his blood hit the sacred hide, the drum emitted a deep, resonant note that shook the very foundations of the earth. The sound was not one of death, but of a terrible, awesome awakening. The ground beneath his feet began to tremble, and the sky above tore open with a sound like a mountain cracking in two. He had given his confession. He had given his blood. Now, the land itself would give its verdict. The cataclysmic sound that erupted from the heart drum wasn't one of destruction, but of rebirth. It was a single pure note that shot into the sky, scattering the blood-red haze and letting the true silvery light of the moon wash over the clearing. Where Adewale's blood had fallen upon the drum, it did not stain. It was absorbed, and in its place, a single perfect crimson cowrie shell appeared, gleaming at the very center of the drumhead. A permanent, sacred reminder of the price that had been paid. Adewale did not feel the pain of death. He felt a profound release, as if a great weight he had carried his entire life had finally been lifted. His body grew light. The last thing he saw was not the spirit or the forest, but a vision of River Olua bursting its banks with clean, clear, rushing water, and he heard as if from a great distance the triumphant song of a single bird. A final, peaceful breath escaped his lips, and his body dissolved not into nothingness, but into a gentle golden mist that settled over the drum, infusing it with a final radiant energy before fading. In the village, the change was immediate and miraculous. The terrible, suffocating silence was shattered by the sudden, joyous chorus of 1,000 birds. It was as if every bird that had ever flown over the Iron Lands had returned at once to greet the dawn. The people stumbled from their huts, their hands over their mouths in awe and disbelief. Before their eyes, the muddy trickle of River Olua swelled, roared, and cleared, becoming a mighty, life-giving torrent once more. The blackened, shriveled yams in the field straightened. Their leaves turned into vibrant green as the soil itself healed. The curse was broken. The first to find the clearing was Dapo, the hunter, following the renewed sounds of life in the forest. He found nobody. He found only Ojuba, the heart drum, sitting serenely on the flat stone, looking more powerful and beautiful than ever, its new crimson cowrie shell pulsing with a soft inner light. Beside it, lying in the grass, was Adewale's simple carving knife. Dapo did not need a seer to explain what had transpired. He felt the truth in the cleansed air, in a profound peace that radiated from the drum. He fell to his knees, not in grief, but in deep respect for the ultimate sacrifice. He returned to the village with the drum, and when he told the elders what he had found, and more importantly what he had felt, a deep collective mourning settled over the people, but it was a mourning mixed with awe and immense gratitude. Adewa was not remembered as a villain, but as a tragic hero who had lost his way, and in the end found the most difficult path back. His story was woven into the very fabric of the tribe's history, not as a tale of shame, but as the ultimate lesson in responsibility and redemption. The drum with its crimson cowrie was never feared again, but revered more deeply than before. It was no longer just a symbol of their collective joy, but a solemn monument to their collective salvation. A permanent reminder that a community's well-being is purchased daily by the choices of its individuals. Babalawo Ifa, when he placed his withered hands upon the new shell, spoke the moral that would be passed down through generations. The greatest poverty is not a lack of food or water, he said, his voice strong and clear. The greatest poverty is a hunger of the spirit, a thirst for that which is not yours. Adewa was uncursed because he desired love. He was cursed because he desired a love that was built on the suffering of others. He believed his want was more important than our need. He confused the beating of his own heart for the rhythm of the entire world. But remember this, a single thread pulled by selfish hands can unravel the entire tapestry, and yet a single sacrifice woven back with selfless love can make that tapestry stronger than ever before. Your heart is a drum. Will its rhythm be a lonely, selfish beat that leads only to silence? Or will it learn to harmonize with the great ancient song of your community, your ancestors, and the very land that gives you life? The story of Adewale and the heart drum became a cornerstone of the Iron people's wisdom. Parents would tell their children not to scare them, but to guide them. They would point to the drum during festivals and say, "See? We are all part of that rhythm. We all hold a note in that song." And on the most still, quiet nights, if you listen very closely by the banks of the river Olua, they say you can still hear it. Beneath the water's flow and the whisper of the wind, there is a faint, steady, and peaceful pulse. It is the sound of a heart that finally found its true rhythm. It is the sound of a man who became a warning, a lesson, and a blessing, forever woven into the heartbeat of the land he helped save. It makes one wonder, doesn't it? In the quiet of your own heart, what rhythm are you playing? And is it a song that gives life to the world around you, or does it only take